Hi everybody!
I don't know about you lot, but I'm getting really tired of hearing the constant nattering of when is the PS5 Pro coming, is there a PS5 Pro, and the I'll wait until there's a PS5 Pro discourse going on within various gaming forums and groups. Sure, there have been rumors since the launch day that there was going to be a PS5 Pro. However, the 9th generation of consoles isn't like the 8th. The consoles are no longer running ultra-low-end components. Seriously, if you look at the Jaguar architecture used by both Microsoft and Sony for their previous generation of hardware, it was originally intended for ultra-low-end laptops, not gaming consoles. Admittedly, both companies did use highly modified Jaguar CPUs, but the fact still remains. These were technically speaking components which were not being used for their intended purposes. So there was actually a legitimate reason for the Pro models with beefier specs. So I said a moment ago the PS4 was under-spec'd for what it was. This is true. By mid-generation, the base and slim models of the PS4 were just not keeping up to the demands of the AAA games of the day. Even the Pro models were struggling at points. Part of why these games struggled performance-wise comes down to them being intended for mid-end computers, which the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One just weren't. Now I know some Nintendo fan is going to come at me in the comments section saying, well, a lot of these AAA games run on Switch just fine, and it's even weaker. Let me stop you there. Yes, these games do technically run on Switch, however they have for the most part been butchered in some way, either with cloud-only play available, cutting down on the number of characters on screen, or looking like very buggy PS2 games. In this instance, I'm calling out Mortal Kombat 1, which didn't even get PS4 or Xbox One ports. Effectively, these games are only running on Switch because of the massive compromises that most gamers just aren't willing to make. Seriously, I'll be talking to my friends who do own a Switch, and they'll say they'll just use their PlayStations, their Xboxes, or their PCs if they want to experience the AAA games. Which tells me Nintendo is really going to have to bring the heat with their next console if they want to keep AAA developers happy, since a lot of them have stated working around the Switch's hardware limitations are rather difficult. Which is something they don't have to worry about with the PS5 or Xbox Series consoles, which are more or less a match for mid-tier rigs from 2020, meaning the hardware is 4 years old at this point. By this point in time, the PS4 was already struggling with some games. I would argue the PS5 hasn't had a game that has really stretched its muscles yet. I'd also say the console is nowhere near tapped out in terms of its potential power, making the need for a Pro model unnecessary. But this brings me on to my second point. We've all heard the saying, history repeats itself. While this is true to an extent, look at the history of gaming consoles. Unless I'm mistaken, and if I am, please correct me in the comments section, Pro models just weren't a thing until the 8th generation. In the past, a console's specs remained the same, even if a slim model was later introduced with more efficient parts. I would say in previous generations this was due to technology just evolving at a much slower pace. However, in the 2010s we saw PCs go from decently powerful to incredibly so. This was mostly thanks to rapid tech advancements which introduced new, more effective methods of production, which brought the prices of higher-end computers down to a more consumer-friendly place, something we aren't presently experiencing. If you look at the costs of just higher-end GPUs, they're worth more than 2 PS5s. Even the mid-end ones cost more than just the PS5, meaning less value to the consumer for only marginal gains at best. Also, the latest generation of NVIDIA graphics cards are becoming more and more power-hungry, requiring stronger and stronger power supply units, which ultimately makes PC gaming more prohibitively expensive than it has been in a long time. If you look at the PS5, its price-to-power ratio is actually quite favorable. It can run AAA titles and look beautiful doing so, all at a fraction of what a mid-end gaming PC will set you back right now. So if you look at it from that perspective, what incentive does Sony have for launching a Pro model when the price would likely balloon for the consumer while only providing a minimal at best upgrade? Logic says a Pro model doesn't make sense from that standpoint alone. If you look at the PS4 Pro's sales figures, which are admittedly hard to find, you'll soon see it was a low volume seller for Sony. It did come at a higher price tag, so that's part of it, and thanks to markup, Sony probably more than recouped their research and development costs on the system. As of 2017, 1 in 5 PS4s sold were of the Pro variant. When factoring in all 3 versions of the system, the PS4 sold 117.2 million consoles as of March 2022, making it the 5th best-selling console of all time. The PS5 has sold an estimated 50 million units so far, which is not bad considering all the challenges the system has faced thanks to the pandemic and the economic fallout thanks to it. It's literally defying the odds, and it's still successful. However, when you consider we haven't even gotten a price decrease, but a price increase on the Slim model, it really shows that a Pro model makes very little sense at this point in time. As consumers tighten their belts for the expected recession, how likely is it we're going to see companies put out high-cost, low-volume selling products? It's not like gaming consoles are a tradable commodity like, say, a Rolex or an Audemars Piguet watch. Those assets have a chance of skyrocketing in terms of value, whereas you go to a second-hand shop to sell a console, you're really not going to get much money for it. In fact, you're going to take a massive loss, which consumers definitely would take a hit on if they sold their base PS5s to buy a Pro model. Of course, you can mitigate that by trading it in at GameStop or something similar, but you're still taking a pretty huge loss, all things considered. Also, let's face it, as money-hungry as these gigantic corporations like Sony are, they're going to follow the trends of the consumer. The consumer didn't buy the PS4 Pro in droves, so why would they buy a PS5 Pro, especially when the economy is expected to tank worldwide? If you look at both versions of the PS5, you'll actually realize it's already upgradable to an extent. Since day one, Sony have given the player the option of purchasing an M.2 Generation 4 SSD, which is really the only upgrade the system needs, as the SSD that ships with the system has a mediocre 825 gigs worth of usable storage, though the Slim version does feature a full terabyte of storage. But even that is fairly woeful. Also, despite Sony having new compression technology designed for the PS5, games are just ballooning in terms of how much room they take up. This is partially because assets need to be rendered in 4K, which takes up a lot of space, so those who own a PS5 basically have to get additional storage. In the near future, I'm going to be running a 2TB M.2 in my PS5, plus the base 825 gigs and the 2TB external hard drive I'm already using. It should be noted at the time of recording, the PS5 can accommodate up to 8TB M.2 drives, and it wouldn't surprise me if it gets increased further down the line. If I remember correctly, the M.2 slot could only support up to 4TB at launch, so it's already improved. Basically, the only thing the PS5 in its base and Slim configuration needs is more storage, which the consumer is free to upgrade if they so choose. The only point I could really see in a Pro model is if they offered more M.2 slots for additional storage, because let's face it, games are getting bigger, and to date we haven't run across a title the PS5 struggles to run if it's optimized correctly. There are only 2 real instances I can imagine the PS5 Pro making a lick of sense, those being if we see tech take another giant leap forward, which I don't imagine is too likely given the state of things at present. The other reason I could see a Pro model making sense is if the PS5 is going to last a lot longer than the typical 6 to 7 years. On average, each generation of hardware lasts 7 years. The PS5 is in its 4th year, and while the experiences have been amazing on the system so far, it hasn't had too many killer IPs yet, though there have been a ton of amazing multi-platform games so far. Either Sony's playing a long game and will make years 5 through 7 killer, or they're playing the incredibly long game and have no intention of launching the PS6 until 2030, in which case, yes, a PS5 Pro would make some sense. If the plan is to keep the PS5 around for a full 10 years as the lead system, then a Pro would make sense, as the technology by years 8 through 9 would have leapfrogged the PS5 to the point it'd be as underpowered as the PS4 was. It certainly makes sense if Sony intends to keep the PS5 as the lead machine for more than a decade, which I don't see as too likely to happen given consoles have a finite shelf life. Either way, I can't think of too many reasons a PS5 Pro makes sense. But what about you? Do you think Sony will launch a Pro version? Let me know in the comments. Also, don't forget to like the video and hit the subscribe button. If you want to support the channel further, you can also consider hitting the join button. You'll gain exclusive perks. Thanks go out to my channel members, R. Campbell and Danny Boy. Want to see more of my Sony-focused content? 2 videos will be popping up on screen now. Check them out, and until next time, keep blazing that trail.